My wife and I met in Savannah, where we both attended college in very different fields. She was going for script writing, and I studied archaeology. The first date went well enough that we continued seeing each other, and the more we did, the more we realized just how perfect we were for each other. She was a little geeky, very feminine, and very good at communicating. When we first dated, we went out together weekly for trivia night at our favorite place and saw each other any chance we got during the week. Before her third year in school started, she moved in with her mom to save money because living on campus wasn't the best financial decision. From the first time I met her mom over dinner, she loved me. So did her sister and nieces. They all accepted me as if I was always part of the family. I had a job lined up as an archaeologist as soon as I graduated. My wife had a little trouble finding a job with her degree, so she started writing scripts to submit to several streaming services and channel networks. None of those panned out. Meanwhile, I proposed and we moved into the house I bought. Regardless of her income, I knew I wanted to marry her. As my wife, she continued writing for about a year, but after that she caved in and got a job as a receptionist at a non-profit organization. I told her she didn't have to work a job she didn't like, but she promised she wanted to do it because sitting at home wasn't cutting it for her. That job lasted a total of 15 months before she quit and started her own home business. She started offering tarot card readings and selling little trinkets she made out of epoxy. Every Saturday, she went to the market with a cart full of her art projects to set up at a table she decorated to look pretty inviting and mysterious. I was surprised at how much money she managed to pull in from doing this. As an archaeologist, I had to travel for work. I would be home for about 2 weeks at a time, then leave for up to 6 weeks at a time. That was the longest it ever was, which I didn't think was that bad. Sure, I missed the intimacy with my wife, but that's what makes marriage so sacred. You wait and remain loyal to your spouse, no matter what life throws at you. And when you reunite, it's the most rewarding relationship experience. I returned from a 6-week trip at one point, and after we had wonderful reunion sex, it seemed like something was bothering my wife. It was like she wanted to say something to me, but wasn't sure how I'd take it. As we sat watching a movie, she clung to her phone, and I could feel her heartbeat racing. I finally paused it and confronted her, saying it was obvious something was on her mind. She swallowed hard and started to cry. She admitted she'd met someone at the market that she really enjoyed talking to. She said she wanted to consider being a life coach to said person, but she wasn't sure how I'd feel about her talking to him every day. I asked her if I could read what they had said to each other so far, so she gave me her phone after she scrolled up on the messages. There wasn't much that screamed infidelity to me. She just asked him how he was handling the move, and reminded him that while having to relocate your family is a huge pain and life obstacle, it isn't the end of the world, and he didn't have to feel trapped. We all have the free will to do whatever we feel like, up to and including buying a plane ticket out of the country and never looking back. I told her it was fine for her to coach people and have friends. I just wanted to know the first names of the people she talked to, and made it clear that I trusted her not to start an affair or behave inappropriately with anyone. She was accepting of my terms, but I did notice a little disappointment in her. Not enough that I could say anything she would have denied it. Half a year passed without an incident or any trouble in our relationship. While I was away, working in Tennessee, my wife called me one evening as I laid in my hotel bed. She was crying, saying she needed to ask me a question that had been on her mind for some time. I told her to ask away, and that I wouldn't be mad at her just for asking a question. She asked me if I wanted to sleep with other women whenever I went on a work trip. I told her no, absolutely not. I never felt the need to sleep with a woman I didn't love or commit my life to. I would wait as long as it took to sleep with her because she was my everything. She was surprised, but seemed comforted. She told me if I ever did want to, I could tell her and she wouldn't be mad. I told her she didn't need to worry about it because it never crossed my mind. I reminded her that when I chose to get married, I made her my one and only for the rest of my life, as much as I would be an archaeologist for the rest of my life. I told her I never wanted anything to come between us, and that sleeping with other people was just a recipe for disaster that could lead to jealousy, problems, and divorce. She agreed with me and seemed to feel much better. She told me she loved me with all her heart and wanted to be my good, loyal wife for life. With that, we said goodnight. The next morning is when my gut started twisting and knotting. I didn't know what was going on at first. I honestly considered food poisoning as a possibility, but after giving it a moment's thought, I realized I wasn't sure I could trust my wife. She never asked me if she could sleep with someone else, but she kind of went around that question by asking me if I wanted to. I decided to go home early, even though my request was denied. I was risking my whole job to drive back home before I was scheduled to leave. After hours of worried driving, I arrived home to find my wife's car in the driveway and no suspicious activity. I was relieved, but that was short-lived. As soon as I unlocked the front door, I heard sounds coming from our bedroom. I raced to it to find my wife having sex with another man. When she saw me standing in the doorway, she screamed. I yelled for AP to get out of my house, which he did after scooping up his clothes. I just stared at my wife in disbelief for a few seconds before reminding her that I had just told her how much I didn't want either of us to sleep with other people and how bad it would be for our relationship. She just whined and asked me what she was supposed to do when most of her life was spent waiting for me to love her instead of actively loving her. I told her she should do what any normal person has to do when they don't have access to a lover. Not meet some stranger and decide to take him to her marital home to have sex while her husband was out working. I told her this went against everything marriage stood for, and that whatever fantasy she had about an open relationship wasn't going to happen with me. I demanded a wife in all senses of the word. She was on her knees, crying her eyes out, begging me with cupped hands to forgive her. She blamed herself for talking to other women about her situation and listening to them when they told her to do whatever she felt was right. I was beside myself. I couldn't believe that even though I was totally clear about how I felt about an open relationship, she still went and talked to other women who encouraged her to give in to temptation and betray her vows. She cheated on me. She kept me in the dark, and I still caught her sleeping with him. I told her to get out. She told me she didn't know where to go. I told her I didn't care. I knew she had family and friends that wouldn't let her spend a night outside, so I told her to go to one of their houses. She wouldn't move. All she did was sit in the hallway, making all kinds of remorseful noises. Whenever she thought of something specific, she'd start sobbing all over again. I ignored her as best I could, locking myself in the spare room. As annoying as it is, I was forced to stand my ground and share the house with her until she was ordered to vacate by the court, when our divorce was final. While we lived separately under the same roof, I posted daily to social media about what she'd done, tagging all her profiles and business accounts to it. I commented on the pictures of her tarot table set up, making smart remarks that questioned her ability to even see her own future downfall. This definitely impacted her reputation. A lot of would-be customers took one look at her social media accounts and found at least one of my comments. It was enough that she lost all motivation to do it. She didn't even try getting a job in her degree field again. My testimony, along with the phone records I requested, were enough to avoid alimony payments. So, without any life prospects or motivation, my divorced ex moved back in with her mother, sister, and nieces. She's basically back to where she was in high school, except much older and sadder. OP, I can't believe your wife had the nerve to sleep with another man after you made it perfectly clear that you would not be okay with an open marriage or sleeping with anyone outside of your marriage. I believe that any man who agrees to something like that is a pushover, not a real man. A real man who wants to be married doesn't get married with the intention of sharing his wife or himself with someone else. Men stand firm in their belief that marriage is a sacred bond between two people, not something that can be open like she was. She just wanted to sleep with someone else while her husband was gone because she didn't know how to be patient and happy with herself. Thank you for sharing your story. I wish you all the best going forward. Now for our next story. Ever since I was a child, I knew I wanted to have a family of my own. I didn't like the family I grew up in, so I started to tell myself I would do better if I ever got the chance. In high school, I met the girl that would become my wife. On the nights when my stepdad felt like blaming me for the family's problems, she would meet me at the forsaken playground gazebo. She brought sleeping bags, pillows, snacks, and a tablet to watch movies on. It was lucky we lived in a southern state, where sleeping outside wasn't a problem much of the year. Nothing ever bothered us in that gazebo, not even bugs. I was convinced at this point that she was my guardian angel, and I would marry her. After the nonsense that is high school was finally over, we got married at 18 years old. Her parents weren't thrilled, but they knew me for years at this point. They allowed us to live together in the basement of their house. Meanwhile, my wife was the sweetest, most understanding woman in the world. She truly loved me. She chose me to be her husband, so I made it my life goal to improve our lives together. We each started working. Neither of us liked our jobs very much, but it was just so we could start accumulating some money. My wife knew how to be selfless and get things done. After 10 months of working full-time, we had earned enough money to buy our own trailer home. It was considerably nicer and larger than the basement. Together, we could afford the lot rent and all the bills we acquired. My wife was lucky enough to get a job she wanted to work for the rest of her life. I, on the other hand, was diagnosed with early onset fibromyalgia. I had intense pain all over my body that was hard to ignore. I tried working through it, and I couldn't. I got a type of pain medicine meant to block the pain receptors, but this made me feel like I was in a dream and completely unable to focus on the tasks at hand. I felt stupid and worthless. During this time, I stopped working and stayed in bed a lot. My wife was my rock and peace. She continued doing what she loved and started taking care of me when she got home. She cooked meals for me, washed my clothes, and vowed not to judge or hate me for what was happening. It was the kind of unconditional love I felt I didn't deserve but always wanted. Eventually, I felt well enough to start painting miniatures. These little game pieces and models are actually worth a lot of money when they're painted well. I never realized my knack for painting until this part of my life, when I felt trapped in my own body. It was just what I needed to boost my confidence and finances. I was able to sell these figures for 4x the amount I paid for them. My wife was extremely happy for me and encouraging. Things started to change when my wife realized how great it would be for us to start going on hikes and traveling together. I knew she was getting bored with the daily routine and needed to have some adventure, so I started taking her out on dates. Considering how I felt, I usually suggested things like restaurants, plays, darts, pottery, the cat cafe, or karaoke night at the bar on the corner. Sometimes even some of those took a lot of energy and brain power I just didn't have, but I did my best to show my wife I could be her man. 5 years after moving into the trailer, my wife didn't want to do these dates anymore. She really wanted to start going on hikes and doing things I just didn't want to do. I suggested she go without me and try to find a group of people to go with. She was all too willing to do that. It was like she was relieved that I suggested it. A few days later, she returned from what she claimed to be her first hiking trip with a group of people from an app she found. She was extremely happy when she told me about the hike, admitting that she mostly talked to one person, who was extremely nice and outgoing. My wife called this friend a she, but I wondered if she was lying because of how my wife spoke to me and made eye contact. I just told her I was glad she was happy and hoped that wherever she went, she would remember how much I loved her. She blushed, said she always would, and kissed me. A few days after that, my wife asked me why I never went out with any of my friends. I told her I didn't need any friends. I was an introverted loner and stronger for it. All I needed was myself and my wife. She smiled and went quiet. The very next day, she told me her dad needed help moving some stuff out of the basement. This was the exact kind of request I hated. I agreed to do it and headed to their house knowing that it wasn't going to be pleasant. When I returned home, I could have sworn I saw a car back out of my driveway before speeding away. The timing was just close enough that I could see it from far away. I entered the house and asked my wife who was just here. She froze in her tracks, looking like a deer in the headlights. She slowly told me that no one was here, it was just her. I looked around and smelled the air like I was some kind of hound. My wife's face was turning red, even though her body didn't move. I searched the house and our bedroom for any clues while she remained silent. It was weird. I found half a footprint by the front door, like someone's shoes were wet and they stepped on the rug before taking them off. The shoe print didn't look like ours, but I couldn't rule it out. I sat on our bed and just had a gut feeling that something was wrong. My wife appeared in the doorway with her arms crossed. She called me Sherlock when she asked if I found anything. I walked up to her and tried to playfully pull her into the bed with me, but she refused, claiming she had to make dinner. 1 month later, my wife had gone on 2 more hiking trips. She took selfies with the group and supposedly pointed out the girl she'd been getting along with. Even though my wife had tried to suggest I get out of the house too, I didn't unless it was with her. I didn't feel right about leaving her in the house alone. I was painting in the spare room one evening, expecting my wife to get home much later. I felt a very faint thud on the floor. It was so faint that I thought it might have been the refrigerator or AC kicking on. A few minutes later, I had a terrible urge to walk around the house. I went into the living room, looked out the window, and didn't see my wife's car in the driveway. I got a drink from the kitchen, and as soon as I started to head back to the spare room, I heard something. I couldn't tell what it was, but I went to our bedroom door and found that it was locked. I was extremely confused because you can only lock the door from the inside. I got a lockpick and popped it open, which is when I heard my wife's worried voice. The door swung open, and I saw a naked man I didn't recognize get off my wife, grab his clothes, and leap out the open window. My wife was half covering herself with blankets, looking at me like a lost puppy. She started saying how sorry she was, but as soon as I started losing my mind, asking her what the heck I just saw, she got defensive. She said I wasn't an adventurous or active man, which really bothered her. With my voice cracking, I asked her if that gave her a right to cheat on me, to break our vows in our own bedroom, while I was in the other end of the house. She was crying hysterically, defending herself while also admitting she was wrong. My vision started to spin, and I passed out. When I came to, she was crying over me. I told her to leave. She said she couldn't because she was my wife. I told her she wasn't anymore, so she went to call her mom. When her mom realized what happened, she told her daughter how despicable she was. I knew she was being lectured because my wife couldn't get a word in. She was whining beside herself until her mom showed up at my house. She asked me if I was going to divorce her daughter the way she deserved, and I said yes. She immediately went to start grabbing her essentials so she could move out. My wife was just screaming. She wouldn't stop saying sorry and begging me for another chance. I barely had the strength to look at her and tell her how much she broke me. I didn't feel the intense love I had built for her over the years. It was immediately gone, leaving a gaping metaphorical hole. She said she felt the same hole, and that we could fill it by staying together and refusing to give up on our marriage. I told her she broke it, and it was shattered. There's no sense in keeping tiny, itty-bitty pieces of a shattered relationship. She didn't agree with my metaphor. She believed we could stay together, but only because she was the one that messed up. If it was me that would have messed up, she would have refused to forgive me. She admitted that in court when the judge asked her how she'd feel if it was the other way around. I was not ordered to pay alimony, and I got to keep my house. The joke's on her because I started making a crazy amount of money every month with my miniature painting. I invented my own group strategy game, which sold for over 6 figures. It's been years and my wife is still single, living in the basement we started out in. I've remarried and handled my marriage in the same way I did my first one, except this time, my wife is actually worth it. OP, your wife clearly had no respect or loyalty for you. As soon as she justified the reason why she wanted to sleep with someone else, she did it. I firmly believe she had him over that day when you saw a footprint. After years in a successful marriage, she became entitled and bored. She started to believe she was a great catch and needed a man that better suited to what she wanted. Something as meaningless as a hobby or willingness to do one specific activity was enough for her to convince herself she could entertain another man. She blamed you for failing to meet her expectations, instead of acknowledging that every person is completely unique. It isn't fair to demand that your spouse behave any certain way. I'm glad you got out of that situation. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.